Guys, this is Mr. H. I am going to create a video on how to do inverse functions. A lot of students generally struggle with inverse functions until they kind of figure out the pattern. And I'm going to try to explain it a little differently. There's two basic functions or two basic things that you need, in my opinion, in order to be able to do inverse functions easily. One is you need to know your order of operations, PEMDAS. Okay, you need to know when you have a bunch of operations that are being put together, what should come first, what should come second, what should come third, etc., etc. The other thing that you need to know is you actually have to know what the inverse operations are. So first thing, you need PEMDAS. Second thing, you need to know what inverse operations are. Now, I've started here. This on the screen is PEMDAS. It starts with parentheses. It then goes to exponents. Then it goes multiplication, division, and then addition, subtraction. And I'm going to go ahead and throw this in. Right on the same level as exponents are logarithms. So we're going to need those as well. But it's parentheses, exponents, logarithms, multiplication, division, addition, subtraction. Now, one of the things that's really critical is it's when you see an explicit parentheses, that's obvious, but there's also implied parentheses, and those also matter. So when we go through some of the problems, I'm going to try to point that out so that you understand how that affects the order of operations. But now, the next thing is I've got a list of some of the more basic operations, and we're just going to do the inverses. Now, so this one, let me make this red. I thought it was red. When you see this, these are pretty simple. The inverse of addition is subtraction, and the inverse of subtraction is addition. That's why I have the arrows going both directions. The inverse of multiplication is, of course, division. The inverse of squaring something is to take the square root. Now, you could write it like this, or you should also know that that's basically the same thing as having a fractional exponent. So, and the bottom line is when you multiply these two, or when you take the inverses of these two things, you should basically be left with 1x. When you do this, you should be left with 1x. So that's kind of the key to make sure that you're doing the inverses right. The inverse of something to the third root is to raise it to the third power. So again, now that's when these are called like power functions. Now this is an exponential function, and the opposite or the inverse of an exponential is a logarithm function. So let's say this was 2 to the x power. The inverse of that would be the log with a base of 2 of x, right? So these are inverses, and you've got to know those as well. So these, if this is x to the third power, this would be x to the third power. If this is x to the 1/3 power, the inverse would be raising it to the third power. The inverse of squaring x is to take x to the 1/2 power. So basically that's what you are looking at. Now, let's go and look at a few problems and let's see how we would do this. Now, the problems that I'm going to use are going to be DeltaMath questions. So on the screen, and I'm going to write these down on my iPad, and then we're going to do it. So it says we have the function f of x equals the 5th root of x plus 2 over 7, and they want us to find the inverse. So I'm going to go back to my iPad now. Where are you? Right here. And so I've got it on the screen. So here's how I like to do it. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to use PEMDAS and figure out what needs to happen. So the very first thing that's happening to the x. Now, this inside, the 5th root that's considered a parenthesis. So we're going to do that first. So the very first thing that we're doing to x is we're adding 2. Then the next thing that we're doing to x is we're taking the 5th root. So I'm just going to put the 5th here. And then the last thing that we're doing is we are dividing by 7. Okay, so now that we've used PEMDAS to find this, I'm going to write PEMDAS here. Now we need to find the inverse operations. So the inverse of dividing by 7 is multiplying by 7. The inverse of taking the 5th root is to raise it to the 5th power. The inverse of adding 2 is subtracting 2. Now, in addition to doing the inverse, we're going to do the reverse of the operation. So this is going to be done first, this is going to be done second, and this is going to be done third. Now, when we get done, we know we're going to have y equals something, and we're going to have x here. Now, all we're going to do is we're going to go through and we're going to do each one of these things in order, and then we'll have the inverse. So the very first thing that we're going to do is we're going to multiply by 7. Okay, next thing that we're going to do is we're going to take it to the 5th power. So we're going to raise the whole thing to the 5th power. And then it says we're going to subtract 2. And that would be the inverse function. So I'm going to write it again, 7x to the 5th minus 2. Now, if I go and I look at what we have here, you will see that, which choice is it? It's right here, the very first one. So I would choose that one and I would submit it. And it says, hey, that's all good. All right, so let's do another one. All right, so let me erase my iPad. So now we have the function f of x is equal to x plus 7 raised to the 7th power divided by 8. And they want us to do the inverse. So we're going to go back to the iPad. And let's go through. Very first thing, according to PEMDAS, is we are adding 7. And then we're raising that sum to the 7th power. So I'm just going to put this to indicate raising it to the 7th power. And the very last thing that we're doing is dividing by 8. So now that we've used PEMDAS to figure out what was being done to x, now we got to take the inverse. So the inverse of dividing by 8 is multiplying by 8. The inverse of taking something to the 7th power is to take the 7th root. Now I've written it with a fraction. You could also write it like this. Both of them are the same thing. I like the fraction because that makes more sense. And then the last thing that we're doing is we're subtracting 7. Now we're going to do this first, we're going to do this second, and we're going to do this third. So we start with this. And so the very first thing that we're going to do is we're going to multiply by 8. And then we're going to take the 7th root. And then we're going to subtract 7. And that's going to be our inverse function. Okay, so if I go back over to DeltaMath, I'm looking for the one that has the 7th root of 8x minus 7. So it would be this one, the third one. Submit it. Says you're absolutely right. All right, so let's go to a little higher level. Let's go to level 3, see what they got there. All right, so let's look at that one. Now this one has f of x is equal to, we're taking the 7th root of x divided by 10, and we're raising that whole thing to the 5th power, and we're adding 1 to that. So when I go over here to my iPad and I put that up, we're gonna do PEMDAS. So the first thing that's being done to x is we're taking the 7th root. So I'm going to do this, the 7th root. Next thing that we're doing is we are dividing by 10. Third thing that we're doing is we're raising it to the 5th power. And then the fourth thing that we're doing is we're adding 1. So we're going to do the inverse. So the inverse is subtracting 1. The inverse of raising something to the 5th power is taking the 5th root. That's a 5. The inverse of dividing by 10 is multiplying by 10. And the inverse of taking the seventh root is raising something to the seventh power. We're going to do this first. We're going to do this second, going to do this third, going to do this fourth, and that's going to be our inverse. So down here, y equals. Very first thing I want to do is I'm going to subtract 1. Done. Then I'm going to take the fifth root. So I take the fifth root of the entire difference. And then I'm going to multiply that times 10. So I'm going to put the 10 in front, and I can do that because of the commutative property, and that looks better. And then I'm going to take the seventh root of, or I'm going to raise all of that to the seventh power, because that's the last thing to do there. And that is our inverse function. 10 times the fifth root of x minus 1, all of that product raised to the seventh power. So if we go over to DeltaMath, let's see, which one would that be? It would be this one here, the third one. And we got it. All right, I'm going to do one more of these, and then I'm going to do one from level 4. So we got another problem here. Let me clear my iPad. Let me write the problem down. F of x is equal to, let's see, we got x to the 1/7 power plus 5 raised to the third power over 7. All right, so this is a little different. So let me bring up the iPad. First thing we're doing is we're going to do PEMDAS. First thing that we're doing is raising it to the 7th power. So I'm just saying raising it to the 7th power, or you can say take the seventh root. We're raising it to the 1/7 power, I should say, which is also taking the 7th root. Second thing that we're doing is we're adding 5. That all of that stuff is inside the parentheses, and then we're raising it to the 3rd power. Okay, and then the fourth thing that we're doing is we're dividing by 7. So we're taking the 1/7 power, we add 5, then we raise it to the 3rd power, and then we divide by 7. So now what we're going to do is we're going to do the inverse. The inverses are multiplied by 7. We're going to take the 1/3 power, or we can say the third root, same thing. And then we can say the inverse of adding 5 is subtracting 5. The inverse of taking the 7th root is to raise it to the 7th power. We're going to do this first. We're going to do this second, this third, this fourth, and we should be done. So we're going to start with y equals x. And then we are just going to go through and we're going to multiply by 7. We're going to take the third root. And then we're going to subtract 5. And then we're going to raise this whole thing to the 7th power. And that is our inverse. So if we go and we look at it, we should look for something that has the third right here. It's this one. It's 7x. We take the third root of 7x, we subtract 5, and we raise all of that to the 7th power. So that would be our answer. And we're done. All right, so let's go and let's look at level 4. Let's see what we got here. All right, so let me clear my iPad and let me write down the new function. F of x equals, it's x to the 3rd power divided by 4. All of that is raised to the 1/2 power. Yeah, so let's pull up the iPad and see what we got here. All right, so the very first thing that I'm doing is I said we're raising it to the 3rd power. And then we are dividing by 4. And then we're raising it to the 1/2 power. All right, so now we're going to do the inverse. So the inverse of taking the square root is basically squaring. The inverse of dividing by 4 is multiplying by 4. The inverse of raising something to the third power is to take the third root. We're going to do that first, second, third. Here is what we start with. We know we got to get y by itself. So first thing we're going to do is square it. Next thing we're going to do is multiply by 4. Then we're going to take the third root. And that is it. So when we look at this, we're taking the third root of 4x squared. So it would be the second one. Submit it. Looks good. Let's try another one. All right, let me erase this. Now, again, once you understand PEMDAS and inverse operations, it's a pretty simple process of at least coming up with what you should be doing, your recipe for coming up with the inverse. So let's see, we have f of x equals 5x raised to the 5th power minus 9 divided by 3. Now, this one is definitely a little more challenging because it's got an exponential function in it. So first thing we're going to do is, now I'm going to throw in a parenthesis so that everyone understands what we're doing here. So basically this is parentheses. So very first thing that we're doing is we're raising x to the 5th power. So we're doing this part first. And then second thing that we're doing is we're raising all of that with a base of 5. So that's an exponential function, right? And then the next thing that we're doing is we are subtracting 9. And then the very last thing that we're doing is dividing by 3. So now we are going to do the inverses. So that's going to be multiplied by 3, add 9. And now this one, we have to take the log with the base of 5 of whatever we have to put in there. And then the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to take the 5th root. So we're going to do this first, this second, this third, this fourth. We reverse the orders. And we're going to start with y equals x. And then we're just going to do each one of these steps. So the first step says to multiply by 3. So we do that. It says then to add 9. So we do that. And then it says take the log of that sum with a base of 5. So let me create a little space here so I can do that. And then let's keep it moving. So this is going to be a log base 5 of all of this stuff, of that sum. And then we've got to take the 5th root of all of that. So this gets kind of messy, but that's what we're doing. That's what we're looking for. So if we go back and we look over here, we got the 5th root of the log. So it would be the 5th root right here. It would be the third one. The 5th root of the log base of 5 of 3x plus 9. Let's submit it, see what we got. It says very white. All right, I'm going to do one more, and then I'm going to stop this. Clear all. All right, now, I didn't say this as I was going along, but hopefully you get it. But every time I put up a new function and I go through the steps, you should stop the video and try it on your own. And do as much as you can. Like, even if it's just, oh, I got the inverses, but I don't know the order. Do as much as you can and then watch it with me and then try to figure out, oh, that's what I should have done next. So don't just watch this and go, oh, that seems pretty simple. I want you to try it with me. So this is the last one. If you need to, go back and watch the video and do that. Stop, do it on your own, and then watch it again. So let me write down the function. So this one is f of x equals 3x minus 4 to the x minus 4 power plus 8 taken to the 7th power. Oops, 7th power. So now let me bring up my iPad and let's make this red. Very first thing according to PEMDAS is this thing right here. We're subtracting 4 from X. And then next thing we're doing is we're raising that whole thing. We have 3 as the base, and that whole part will be the exponent. And then we add 8. And then we raise all of that to the 7th power. So now we're going to do the inverse. So the inverse of raising something to the 7th power is taking the 7th root, or you can take the 1/7 power, raise it to the 1/7 power, same thing. The inverse of adding 8 is subtracting 8. The inverse of raising something, having something with a base of 3 is to have a logarithm with a base of 3 of whatever it is that you need. And then the last thing is adding 4. So we're going to do this first, this second, this third, this fourth. We're going to start with this. And then we're just going to do what the recipe says. So the very first thing we're going to do is we're going to take the 7th root. So we're going to do 7th root. Then we're going to subtract 8 from that. So we're going to go subtract 8. And then we're going to take the logarithm with a base of 3. So this is going to be a log. Whoops. This is going to be a log base 3 of this entire thing. And then we're going to add 4 to this. And that's what we got. So if we go back and we look at the DeltaMath, we're looking for something that has +4. So we know it's not the first one. We're taking log 3, so it would be this one. Let me double check, make sure that's right. Yep, that's it. Submit it. Ooh. Ooh. What happened? What did I mess up? Let's see. Let's see. Mine, I had log 3. Oh, shoot. The 7th root wasn't supposed to be over the -8. I just selected the wrong one because this isn't extending there. So that was my bad. It should have been the one underneath it. Whoops. So I can't end on that one. I can't end on that mistake. Let me try another one. That was my bad. I didn't select the right one. All right, so let's do one more. Boom. Now, make sure you try this on your own before I do it. So stop the video and try this on your own. This is a base of E. So we're going to do PEMDAS. First thing that we're doing is we're doing what's inside the parentheses. So we're adding 3. Second thing, we're multiplying by 5. And then we're raising that all with a base of E. Okay, so we do this first, do the multiplication second, and then we raise it to the with a base of E. Now, for the inverses, we are basically going to take the natural log, and then we're going to divide by 5, and then we're going to subtract 3. So it's going to be 1, 2, 3. And so we start with this. So we're going to start with the natural log of X, and then we're going to divide it by 5. And then we're going to subtract 3. So this was pretty simple. Maybe they gave me an easy one since I goofed up on the last one. So I got this third one. Oh, all right. So this is a little longer than I wanted, but basically I just wanted to work through a couple examples to show you if you understand PEMDAS, you use that first. Always go through PEMDAS first. Use the parentheses, do the exponents first. Then if you got some powers, you do those. You got multiplication, division, do that. And then you got addition, subtraction, do that. And then you're going to do the inverse operations for every one of those operations. And then you just reverse the order and you're going to cobble together your inverse function. All right, I hope this has been helpful. Leave me a comment if there's anything that's unclear. I hope this has been helpful. Let me stop the share and let me stop the recording.